All right, let's stay with that story now of South Africa officially starting its presidency of the G20 today. As part of its leadership role, the country is calling for a review and strengthening of the African Union's capabilities, ensuring it can better mobilize and engage its member states to address key global challenges. This marks a significant moment for South Africa as it seeks to enhance Africa's voice on the international stage. For more on this, let's now speak to Hannah Nobrega, Economist at Prescient Investment Management. Hannah, thank you so much for your time and good afternoon to you. As we've said, it's an important time for South Africa, given that it is the first country on the African continent to lead the G20 forum. But practically, what does this mean for South Africa and, of course, the African continent from a growth perspective?
Thank you so much, Anati. So, as President Ramaphosa referred to, the G20 accounts for 85% of the global GDP. That means that South Africa also contributes to this. 75% of global trade is actually represented through the G20 as well. And we are the last country that is assuming presidency before, developing country that's assuming presidency before the developed markets start assuming presidency. So next year, from 2026 onwards, it's the United States and then other developed markets. So this is really the last chance for the global South and developing markets to get their voice out and really communicate what is needed for global trade, specifically for developing markets, and then also so specifically fair and free trade within the African Union. And also with other developed markets such as Brazil, Indonesia. And there are really three key mandates that is really important for these countries. So we have equality and equity, sustainable growth, and then also solidarity. And that solidarity means that forming the one voice across the global South. What this means for South Africa is that it's really pivotal for our domestic growth. So because we're a small open economy, we are very affected by what happens globally. This means that we can align our domestic policy with global policy or with our foreign policy. So trade can occur more freely. And it really allows us to position ourselves correctly within the new era of global growth, specifically coming out of COVID, now that everything's normalized, and also making sure that we're positioned correctly with the geopolitical tensions that are possibly arising with the new elections from the United States.
And just on that last note, I mean, it is a very difficult time for South Africa to be coming into this, given, the polarized world and those difficult geopolitical issues that we are currently seeing. How hard then will it be for South Africa? How hard will it have to work to leave a solid legacy on these pivotal issues, and some of which you've mentioned, that really support the whole agenda of the global South, as it were, including issues like climate change, strategy and funding of that, food security or scarcity, and economic growth in a whole, especially when you consider that South Africa is the fourth emerging market in a row to assume the G20 presidency. You've mentioned some of those countries, of course, Indonesia, India, as well as Brazil. Trump also indicating that he might or will do away with the climate-related policies, especially those implemented by Biden, doesn't help things. But just talk to us about how difficult a time then this will be for South Africa to maintain that legacy.
So as much of a difficult time it might be, it's also a very exciting opportunity that South Africa has to actually have a voice and have a proper say in what is needed for developing markets. So what can really happen and what South Africa needs to really focus on is smoothing the transition from developed markets and smoothing any tensions that are between developed and developing markets with the geopolitical tensions. We can start to really hone in on perhaps figuring out what climate change policies should remain in place on a global level. So if Trump has to do away with some of the climate change policies within America, perhaps the G20 climate change policies will still remain intact if we make a case that's good enough in an economic sense. So if there's still a way to make money through trade that also implements climate change in a positive way, perhaps through carbon offsetting, then you really incentivize developed markets to invest in developing economies in a climate positive way rather than a climate negative way. So it really depends how we play it, and then moving forward from there, if we are able to sustain a legacy that also helps the African Union and trade within the African Union. So South Africa is one of the only countries that is representative of the entire African continent that is also part of the G20. So it's a major opportunity for South Africa. It's giving Africa a big voice. It's allowing us to really to incentivize trade, to incentivize funding and investment into the African continent as a whole.
And that is encouraging, to hear, Hannah, in terms of just the opportunity it holds, not only for South Africa as a member state, but also the African Union, which joined a year ago, and the African continent. It really is. But just looking at the fact and just listening to President Cyril Ramaphosa saying that they will have to work very closely with the United States, which takes over, next in 2026. I would imagine that handover period will afford South Africa then that opportunity for them to work very closely with the Trump administration. Just in light of some of the key issues and areas that South Africa should really be putting on the table, we've got, of course, AGOA. There's also mention of BRICS, member states by Trump on X just recently. So, of course, we know that that is also on his radar. But importantly, over the next few weeks, as it does assume this power, this presidency today, what are the key issues that it should address immediately with the Trump administration coming in next month?
Okay, so I think one of the most important issues to concentrate on, and South Africa is really positioned really well domestically for this now with the GNU as well, is sustainable growth. And that can incorporate climate change, but it also incorporates energy, transportation, logistics, and all of these start domestically. We're busy fixing it. We're busy our policies are busy aligning really nicely domestically to transition globally as well. And with the sustainable growth mandate in mind, together with the GNU, we really stand in a strong position to actually grow globally, where we're aligning mandates and singing the same tune, both locally and globally, when we're transitioning between and having talks with the US and President Ramaphosa and Trump will have good discussions there.
Yeah, I mean, notwithstanding, of course, this being a great opportunity, but as an economist, what are some of the red flags that you get, especially when we're seeing so many things being said ahead of the US elections and post-elections, those fears also coming in about some countries having to face possible 100% tariffs. What are you watching and monitoring for?
So at Prescient, we specifically watch. So we consider a lot of data points every single day. Something that is quite key to keep an eye on, especially with tariffs. If Trump imposes 60% tariffs on all developing markets, then that can impact the revenue that South Africa is able to make through exports, and that's one of our biggest points of revenue as well. Which actually makes this opportunity of us being assuming presidency of the G20 allows us to get some negotiation scope for the tariffs specifically. If you consider the BRICS formation as well, there's a little bit of tension there because you have Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and then the relationship that Trump has with Russia and China are quite opposing, and they're quite polar. So South Africa will really play a big role in harmonizing that relationship, hopefully, especially with the assumed presidency. And this can mitigate perhaps some risks of global trade issues. Some of the opportunities that we also face, at least, are that the commodity prices are going to come, they're almost on a rise again now, so that allows South Africa to have a little bit more revenue just in the price perspective of the commodities that we do export, even if tariffs are increased by quite a lot. But yeah, the tariffs they do remain quite a red flag. We do hope that the funding with the Development Bank, the new funding dynamics of the G20 might aid us at least in positioning ourselves correctly as well then.
Hannah, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Hannah de Nobrega, economist at Prescient Investment Management, speaking to us there as South Africa officially begins its presidency of the G20 today.